MiCA's, or Markets in Crypto Assets, grandfathering ends on July 1st, which is a couple of days from here. And a lot of you are wondering what that means for you in the European Union. And as every time, we brought to you the man, the legend, who can answer those questions. So this video is about what you can, should, and should not do when it comes to MiCA if you are in Europe. Enjoy. I have 𝗏𝗲𝗵𝗲 from MiCA Crypto Alliance, a prominent consultancy working with MiCA. 𝗏𝗲, thank you so much for jumping on. It's going to be a very short interview. It's going to be a very short discussion, but I really want to get to the point on what is MiCA and why should anybody in Europe care? And then we're going to go deeper into what we can do.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. MiCA is Markets in Crypto Assets Regulation. It's the regulation for crypto in the EU. It regulates crypto in general, like the crypto assets, and also regulates the crypto asset services, right? That is what your exchange does, what your custodian does, right? So MiCA creates this category called crypto asset service providers, right? A custodian, an exchange, a trading platform. These are the providers, and what MiCA says essentially is they need to have a license, right? But the issue is all of these European countries, they have a pre-MiCA regime, right? So the whole point of MiCA was creating an EU-wide market where if you get a license in Germany or in France, you can operate then in Greece or in Spain without having to get yet another license. But to achieve that, we need to transition from the old regime to the new regime. So if you had a German-only pre-MiCA license and you want to apply for a MiCA license, how do you do it? Well, that's why MiCA creates this grandfathering or transitional regimes, which can last up to 1.5 years. The maximum grandfathering period ends on July 1st, that's next week, which means that if you had a pre-MiCA license and you had not received a license yet, well, you cannot operate in the EU anymore.
What does it mean for users? This is what it means for, we're talking about exchanges. That's what a lot of people obviously are wondering. A lot of people are using exchanges that are licensed, but not necessarily have MiCA license, exchanges that are, non-KYC exchanges, wallets. What does it mean for people in Europe? Do they have to move their money from non-MiCA compliant exchanges? Can they still use non-KYC exchanges? What does that mean?
All right, so let's distinguish two different situations. One of them would be an exchange that is not regulated under MiCA because it's not even in the EU to begin with. And another is an exchange that is in the EU and that has applied or has not applied for a MiCA license and they have not received it, right? These are slightly different circumstances. So if an exchange is not in the EU, and we can come back to this, that exchange is not allowed to provide services to the European
Sorry,
customer.
Juan, just so we understand, when you say in the EU, does that mean that they have an EU address, an office? Do they do marketing towards the EU? What does that mean that they are in the EU?
Exactly. To be in the EU means to have a registered office in the European Union, right?
Okay.
If you need to have one of those and you need to have a license to be able to operate in the European Union and offer your services. But what happens if a European customer goes on the internet and finds a Canadian exchange, right? Well, in that case, you're not really offering your services to the European customers. The European customers, they came to you. Right? So that is what we call reverse solicitation. So if you have, say, an exchange in the United States and you do marketing of your services, you try to acquire services in the European Union, you are doing solicitation. You're soliciting customers. That's not allowed, right? And that's actually already not allowed since last year. There's nothing in particular that changes next week. In theory. In practice, of course, enforcement becomes more strict stricter next week. So yeah, if you have a non-EU exchange, that's a challenge. And we can dive into the practical implication of what next in a second, right? But also, if you have I'd say a European exchange that had a pre-MiCA license, but is not getting its MiCA license by July 1st, then that exchange has to wind down the services. That does not mean that your assets are going to disappear from the face of the earth. The exchange is allowed to, the exchange has to do a wind down, an orderly wind down, and of course, keeping safe custody of your assets in the meantime and arranging for the process so that you can get your assets back. That's something they are allowed to do beyond July 1st. So it's not
that basically means that they will allow customers to withdraw their funds even if they didn't get the license.
Exactly. That should happen. That is what is supposed to happen. They cannot onboard new customers, and they can also keep providing services to the existing customers that are not related to, getting your money out. And of course, there is a strong possibility.
Hold on a second. So if they acquired European users by July 1st, can they offer the same services for these European users after July 1st?
No, not really. What they can continue doing is keeping the safe custody of those assets,
Okay.
and anything they need in order to wind down. But they cannot really keep offering their regular services, like trading services, right?
Understood.
These are not things we're allowed to do.
Understood.
Yeah.
So I understand, again, from obviously you work with institutions, exchanges, you consult a lot of companies, but I want to focus much more on our viewers a little bit. Everything you explained is a disadvantage for the exchange to offer their services. But what happens if there are a bunch of non-KYC exchanges that operate outside of the EU, that never had an EU office, might not even had an EU marketing? Let's say they do, doesn't really matter. Do I as a consumer are in a legal disadvantage or in a legal threat if I use any of these exchanges that do not have a MiCA license?
Yeah, in principle, as a consumer, as a user, you are not in a big problem. The problem is mostly on the side of the exchange. The main challenge that you face as a user is that if that exchange gets into some sort of trouble, at one point that exchange may say, we're not offering our services to you anymore. And if because that exchange is not in the EU, you cannot go to an EU regulator and say, hey, where's my guarantees that I should have as an EU user? The regulator is going to say, well, you have started using a non-EU exchange, so what do you expect from us, right? So in practice, there's not a big problem. The distinction here is marketing. So an exchange, a foreign exchange or other service provider is not allowed to do marketing in the EU. Solicitation of customers, really. That can be very broad, right? So I can share some links later on what activities counts as solicitation of customers. But sponsoring a football match, sharing, distributing T-shirts in a crypto conference, that all of these things can be construed as solicitation of customers, which is why DeFi protocols are not really advertising in the EU anymore. They are not sponsoring many events anymore because they are afraid that they might get into some sort of trouble as they don't have a license because they are decentralized. So yeah, that's one of the circumstances. The other circumstance is what happens if you were in, say, a German exchange with a Pre-MiCA license and they fail to get that license in time, then that exchange is going to have to wind down. Yes. So in that case, of course, if you want to be prudent, you could check whether your current providers have a license. Now, this situation is interesting because they are allowed to continue providing the services for yet another week. And in practice, their supervisors, their regulators, they are overworked and they have failed to process all of the applications in time. So we are expecting a wave of last-minute applications in the last approvals in the last week. That's going to happen, but you don't know if your exchange is going to be among those last-minute approvals. As I said, your assets are not going to disappear, but it is obviously always more convenient to have a licensed exchange. There can also be some extra disruption because your exchange or service provider might have another provider itself, right? There's a supply chain, right, of licensed entities. So maybe your provider has a license, but not the provider of the provider. So there will be a bit of friction. To have an idea, there's around 3,000 pre-MiCA service providers, pre-MiCA CASPs. Half of those are not really active. So let's say 1.5 thousand. And we're expecting to have 250 approved by next week. So that's really 75% of the market by entity count being wiped out. Of course, the majority of those entities are small. The main entity that has not gotten a license yet is Binance, and that must represent like around 30% or 20% of the trading volume. But that's still a big hit for the European market. So there's going to be a bit of consolidation.
I think that what I understand from this, and we're coming to Tom, I think what I understand from this is that me as a user, all this FUD about, oh my God, you have to sell your assets, you have to get out of these exchanges, you're gonna get frozen. All this is just FUD. You as a consumer have not much to worry about. As you said, if you're a MiCA compliant, if you're using a MiCA compliant exchange, you have certain benefits. For example, if that exchange has any compliance issues, regulatory issues, goes under whatever MiCA, under MiCA, you are to some extent protected. If you use a non-MiCA compliant exchange, you can't help with that, but you're not doing anything illegal by using these services. And who are going to be in trouble if in case they continue offering their services can be the exchange, but not the users. Do I understand all this correctly?
Yeah, that's correct. MiCA regulates the service providers, not the users. It's supposed to try to protect the users. They can maybe doing that correctly or incorrectly, but it's not like a user is going to be fined for using this or this other provider. If you use a licensed provider, and of course, if your provider already has a license, there's a bit more certainty than if you think they're going to get it next week, then of course that minimizes disruption to you. But yeah, the regulatory trouble is all for the provider, not for the user.
Appreciate you, Juan. We're gonna link in the description links to you guys, so people will be able to get in touch if they want to learn more and read up on all the stuff. I appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
If you've been watching this interview and wondering what EU compliant, MiCA compliant exchange you might want to use, we have a partner here, Gate EU. They are MiCA compliant, already having a license. They are also title sponsors for Red Bull. There is a link in the description to there. You can try them out, sign up using the link in the description, and enjoy better fees. Thank you so much for watching. Truly appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next one.